So now we are recording, and Alex, I think you are able now maybe to share your screen. I think I have allowed you to now. Can you please check if you can share it? Great.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, we can see your screen. So the stage is yours, Alex.
Okay, thank you, Natalia. Thank you for having me. I have prepared some material that I'll show you. I'll focus today on the emergence of hierarchical markets. This is what we have been doing for basically 25 years now. We are designing and implementing wholesale and retail energy markets. Over the last 10 years, we see the emergence of multiple hierarchical markets as an important part for energy transition. That's the focus of my presentation today. If you have clarifying questions, feel free to interrupt me and ask me any questions you may have. The material I have prepared are in the following areas. Basically, starting from the basic principles of market design, the emergence of energy markets, wholesale markets, retail markets at the DSO level, local energy markets. We'll talk about distributed energy resources and markets behind the meter. I'll discuss briefly the revenue stacking model, which is very important. And I'll close with the transactive energy market and the basis of that, which is blockchain. And I will close with some key messages. I have been lucky to live in California. California was the first market to deregulate the energy market. This was in the middle 90s. And this was the first wave of deregulation. There was another major wave for the energy market. And the first two waves were driven by basically increase in efficiency in investment and operation through wholesale markets. Also, back then, we privatized the electricity infrastructure. So these were the two key objectives of the market. Now we are in the third wave of the energy market design, the third wave, but the third wave is driven by different objectives. The most important objective is the environmental agenda for decarbonization and reducing the global warming. This was not an objective back in the 90s. Also, another major catalyst for the third wave is the rapid technological innovations that we have seen in grid edge technologies like IoT, Internet of Things, and also other DRs, distributed energy resources, we'll call them DRs. But third, there is a social movement towards consumer choice and what we call the democratization of the energy supply through DR growth. Everything becomes local, everything becomes decentralized. Think of it, what happens in other industries, everybody wants to go to buy local, your food, everything from local markets, as opposed to centralized markets. So this is the main objectives and catalysts of the third wave that we're experiencing now. So the new principles of the energy market design are modify the design to decarbonize the energy system, allow consumer choice and participation of edge grid assets in all markets. Everything becomes local, very close to the end users. Avoid subsidies, that's fundamental, of course, and I'll talk about this later. The markets become decentralized, and we have this diversification at what we call complementarity of resources to maximize efficiency gains. We cap, for example, solar with storage and other devices. And by aggregating those devices, we create what we call virtual power plants that become very efficient and actually less risky than centralized plants like gas power plants or fossil power plants. An important problem, of course, remains the missing money problem, which we still solve now with capacity markets or effective scarcity pricing. In other words, allow prices to go very, very high, or a combination of both. Now, when I use the term multi-tier markets, I'm referring to coexistence of wholesale markets, market operators, ISOs in the US, TSOs in Europe, and power exchanges, distribution energy markets at the DSO level, local energy markets, markets behind the meter, meaning at the customer level, and now we have transactive energy markets. This is the basic market design in a wholesale level, let's say in the ISO level for independent system operators. As you see here, we have many, many market elements. Basically, we have spent our entire careers developing those markets, and now we know how they work. When we studied in the mid-90s in California, basically we started following academic papers. Basically, we didn't know much what we're doing. Okay, we didn't have tools to simulate the market. We're going by conviction, as we say, by conviction and by implementing equations and trying to make sure it works. And as you remember, the California market led to the energy crisis of 2000. We have various market elements like forward market, day-ahead market. We have mitigation, very important, to mitigate the offers to solve the mitigation problem. We have various processes like reliability process. We have markets for transmission. We have markets for ancillary services. We have real-time markets. These are markets for the next 5 minutes or the next 15 minutes in Europe. In the US, it's every 5 minutes. We have financial markets for transmission. In Europe, you have physical markets. I have been advocating to Brussels to move to transmission markets, financial markets who are superior. In other words, we decouple operations from the financial aspects of the transaction. So someone that does not have assets, like a bank or a speculator, like Morgan Stanley or Barclays, can go and buy a financial transmission right without having physical assets. But we need that for liquidity. We have capacity markets, and of course, we have virtual trading markets. Each one of these is a separate presentation, really, of an hour. I have one slide for each. I'm not going to do justice to them, but this is the markets, the area we have spent basically our entire lives building, designing, and implementing in various countries. Now, there are some fundamental differences between US and Europe that I will discuss in the next slides. The math is complicated. 70% of our work is basically math. And what I gather is you're an optimization group. So this is the right group. So if there is one key message that I'll give you is learn about optimization, linear, nonlinear, mixed network programming. 70% of our work is optimization. Actually, just to give you an idea, to develop and design a market with all these market elements, the math really exceeds about 300 pages. I'm not going to focus in this presentation on the math part. You will learn that in school, but I will focus on the market design. What drives the design for these markets? All I want to say here, the problem is very complicated because we have to deal with continuous variables. We have also discrete variables, like let's say commitment variables. 0 if a unit is committed, not committed, 1 if it's committed. So we have fixed costs, variable costs, putting all together to minimize the procurement cost through mixed integer linear programming, which is a standard method over the last, I would say, 15 years. Before that, we're using Lagrangian relaxation. It was not working very well. Now this problem is scalable. We can implement it for huge markets with millions of controls. That's why it's important also to understand numerical analysis in your studies. The technologies we apply are based on what we call mixed and linear programming. We separate the physics from the economics. And again, this is in the US markets. We have the power flow on the right here. We have different slates of power flow, one for every hour. And on the left here, we have the optimization, the economics. That's where the offers go from the participants, let's say generators and loads. In Europe, you don't have the right part. You don't have the power flows. This is important. I'll explain that this creates some problems, why this creates some problems. So in the US, this is the market that we implement now. Actually, we started from a zonal model that did not have transmission. It had only the left part. We separate the problem because computationally is extremely complicated, and we iterate between the two. It's a nonlinear problem. We linearize the nonlinear equations for transmission through what we call the PTDFs. PTDFs, as you see here, the power transfer distribution factors. We pass the linearized constraints to the economic problem. That's where the offers are. We solve MIP. We iterate a couple of times. We also linearize the losses, and hopefully in about 3 iterations, we'll solve the problem. If you don't solve the problem with 3 or 4 iterations, then you really have feasibility problems. That's the basics of solving this huge, very complicated problem. Now, we perfected the solution for that. There are a lot of tricks how to do this at Converge. People have spent their entire careers how to do this, but that's the basics of that. So if you become a market designer, or if you are in a school, an academic, or you will deal with these problems in one or the other way. Just to give you an idea how efficient we have become, to give you an idea, for a market like California, for the following day, meaning the following 24 hours, we have one for each hour, we have one power flow for each hour. If you include contingencies, we have in a network of 5,000 buses, 8,000 lines. If you include the number of generators, 1,500 generators, we create a problem with about 1.5 million constraints, and we have about 150,000 controls. And we solve this in 7 minutes. So the problems become bigger and bigger and bigger. This is just for the wholesale market, just to give you an idea of the level of complexity. So since you are in school, in my mind, you need to focus to anything that has to do with optimization, but furthermore, numerical analysis. It's very important because we have a lot of numerical problems in solving these problems, and sometimes they are not well defined. Just to give you an idea, I'm focusing only in one element of the market design for day ahead. This is for tomorrow. This is the market for tomorrow. The market for tomorrow, basically on the left here, we have the market participants at the bottom. They submit their offers in a system that need to be validated. The ISO or the TSO in Europe is doing certain things to prepare the system to deal with reliability. We call this process RMR, reliability must run. In other words, you need to have some units online in order to solve problems the markets cannot solve. let's say, voltage problems or stability problems. This is kind of unfortunate because it creates arbitrariness in the market that the market participants don't like. The offers go to a market in the system of a TSO of an ISO, and they are being analyzed there because we cannot accept any offer. Somebody can submit an offer of $1 million. Of course, it's not accepted. It is going through a filtering process. We call this MPM, market power mitigation. In the US, we have 2 passes. We have written a lot of papers on this. If you want to, by the way, for every element, we have written a lot of papers. If you want to develop further expertise on that, after the data is, the offers are clean and mitigated, we call those mitigated bids. We run the day-ahead market, and then we run a process called reliability unit commitment. At the end, we get the results. The results are basically schedules and prices. Now, the prices in the US are locational, meaning every bus has a different price. For example, in California, we have thousands of prices. In Europe, we work with bidding zones, that I will talk about this. This is a political issue, unfortunately. There are certain countries, the big countries like Germany, that they don't want to go to Nodal. This is still a very intense debate, even though the academics in Europe prefer Nodal. There are specific policy reasons why the big energy companies don't want Nodal. They have large bidding zones, which is very good for traders, but not for consumers. So in Europe, we have prices per zone, let's say for the country of Germany. In Greece, for example, there is one zone, there is one price for the entire country. In Italy, you have 5 zones or 6 zones, so you have 5 or 6 prices. That's how the day-ahead process works. Now, in terms of the horizon, offers come in a week in advance or up to 10 a.m. the day before. You see on the left, day-ahead market close. So 10 a.m. the market closes, offers come in. For the following day, we call the following day the active day, from 12 a.m. to 12 a.m. of the following day. And then we can have a replication of offers for day 2 and day 3. That's another big issue, how we do the replication, depending on a weekday or weekend. But once the market closes at 10 a.m., all the software of the ISOs and TSOs runs and computes schedules, dispatches, and prices. Now in the US, as a result of the renewables, we're moving to a 15-minute horizon. In other words, the time horizon in the active day, it's not an hour, in other words, 24 intervals, but it's 15 minutes, which complicates the problem even further. Now, the commodities that we buy and sell in those markets, of course, is energy, day-ahead and real-time energy, but also many ancillary services, as we call them. In the US, we have regulation down, regulation up, spinning, non-spinning. In Europe, we call them FCR, AFRR, MFRR, and restoration reserves. Think of the ancillary services as different standby capacity that has different flavors, different response characteristics. In other words, regulation is like capacity that you have that needs to respond within seconds. This is what we call the AGC. Regulation up is given an instruction to a unit to go up in regulation. The equivalent in Europe is the AFRR. So these are ancillary services, like going to a nice ice cream store and buying different flavors of ice cream. It's the same thing. This is similar capacity, but has different characteristics. So people who are not in the business, they think that energy is one product. It's not one product. There are many products. Actually, there are markets who have developed. They have many more ancillary services. Australia, for example, has 8 or 9 ancillary services. So these are different products that are procured through markets. Now, in Europe, since you are in the European, in Europe, or you were, the markets in Europe are different. There is a different philosophy, and it's a market that advantages the traders. There is a forward market that starts from, let's say, years ahead. These are physical markets, but also financial markets. There were explicit auctions for transmission. We call those PTRs, physical transmission rights, as you see on the left here. We have some financial transmission rights across countries, cross-border trading. This is the forward market. Then we have the day-ahead market, which has implicit auctions for transmission. In day-ahead, Europe couples countries. For example, Greece now is coupled with Bulgaria and Italy. So we have the Central European market. Then we have the market between Spain and Portugal. And the objective is to have one market for the entire Europe. We call this coupling, for price coupling. This is day ahead and also the intraday that runs continuously. The first three markets, forward, day ahead, and intraday, we have built those markets in certain countries in Europe. There is a company called Power Exchange that runs these markets. And then you have the market in real time that is run by a different company. In other words, Europe has unbundled the system, and the system operator runs the real-time market, and the market operator runs the first three markets. In the US, we consider this an academic fallacy, and we have the same company running all markets, okay? The other problem is in Europe, you have zonal definition. It's not a nodal market. There is a calculation methodology for capacity. The capacity is allocated in the forward market. And of course, there are different designs for balancing. So that gives you an idea of as you see here, there is no mention of transmission. We don't take account transmission in Europe. So I was always wondering how we make the system in Europe physically realizable, because you don't have a unit commitment in the day ahead to solve the real problem with the physical constraints. Generators have many constraints like minimum uptime, minimum downtime, ramping, capacity constraints, forbidden regions. Each generator has about 15 constraints or so that in the US, we explicitly respect them and observe those through the unit commitment. We enforce them in the unit commitment of the ISOs. In the day-ahead market in Europe, you don't have those. So generators submit offers, but when the market clears, there is no provision in the day-ahead to look at those constraints. So how the market in day-ahead produces visibility? The way the market participants do it, they do it through a complex process of what we call offers. For example, we have piecewise linear offers, stepwise offers, mixed offers, and that's how we solve the markets in Central Europe, in Nord Pool. MyBell here is the market in Spain and Portugal, the GME market. But this is not enough. So in Europe, we have introduced a complex array of offers. There are block offers who are very important. We designed that for certain countries, there is a block profile order offer, which is basically you submit for a certain number of hours the same price that has maybe a different queue, a different amount. And that offer, that block offer, is accepted if the minimum acceptance ratio is within the money. For example, if you look at the bottom here, you accept this order if it's in the money, which means if the price is below the average MCP, MCP is the marginal clearing price, it rejects the offer If it's out of the money, which means the P, if you see at the bottom here, is higher than the average MCP, it is partially accepted if it's in the money. So there are different variations of that. For example, you can have flat offers where not only the price is the same for a certain number of hours, but also the Q, the amount. There are other types of offers that are in the same family. We call those linked block offers and exclusive offers. Traders use those extensively in Europe. They achieve certain things to respect certain constraints of their generators. So it's a complicated structure, more complicated than in the US. That's how they solve the physical problem, to respecting the constraints of the generators. I can go on and on about those offers. The important thing is that this belongs to a family of offers. For example, you have a parent, a child, and a grandchild. And for the child to be accepted, the father should be accepted. So there's a whole theory about social welfare there, how to maximize the social welfare, and how the parent, the child, can be accepted if the combined social welfare is positive. So again, this is economic theory, and that's why I tell you, you guys need to understand basic economics to be able to really understand those markets. So I continue with the block offers, how this works. If the price the price is low of the block offer, below the MCP is accepted. If it's a medium offer, maybe it's partially accepted. If it's a high offer, then it's not accepted if it's higher than the MCP. One thing you see here that's very important. Europe has put the risk of clearing, the risk of what we call physical realization to the market. In other words, the market participants are responsible to come up with schedules that are physically realizable. Okay, in the US, that complexity is not in the market, is at the central operator. The operator, the DSO or the ISO, has all the complexities in a very complex software. The complexity in the European markets is in the market. The risk is in the market. If you learn risk analysis, you cannot eliminate risk. Simply, you move the risk to someone else. You shift the risk to someone else. Somebody else takes the risk at the price. So that's how we clear those markets in Europe. Now, there are certain markets like the market in MIBEL, which is in Spain and Portugal, where it has also complex offers. Other countries like Greece that don't have complex offers. Complex offers are needed to respect the ramping constraint of a generator. Generators have ramping constraints. You cannot go from 1 hour H, you see here on the left, to hour H plus 1 and ask the generator to go up 500 megawatts. They may not have the ramping. We have ramping constraints. So certain countries have complex orders that we call them load gradient offers, where the offer for H plus 1 is dependent on the offer at our H. So it is an increment or a decrement with respect to our H. And that's how they enforce ramping constraints. Something that in the US would become part of the optimization of the ISO. But now the market has to deal with that. They even have economic constraints in MIBEL. We call those minimum income constraints, as you see on the right, which means if my total revenue as a generator, which is a summation of fixed cost and variable cost, is not higher than the price, don't accept me. So there are minimum economic constraints also, which is something that is really for us on this side of the Atlantic to understand. We solve these problems through the nodal markets, but in Europe, certain countries have even economic offers in the optimization. I will talk very briefly about transmission. We have spent our entire life solving transmission problems. As I said, Europe does not deal with transmission at all. It's like solving a problem, a transportation problem, a highway, by looking at the cars only, but not at the congestion of the highways. Look at the left here. At the left, I have a zone A and a zone B. There is a line between the two with a limit QAB. On the left, I have cheap power, inexpensive power, and the supply curve looks like this, monotonically increasing. On the right, I have expensive generator, it's a demand, and the demand curve looks like this on the right, it's monotonically decreasing. So cheap power from the left moves to the right to satisfy the load. Let's say the power from left to the right increases the thermal limit of the line QAB. Then you have a congestion problem. So in Europe, what you do, you see the supply curve on the right, and you see the demand curve. When they cross at Q1, there's a price P, but that Q1 will burn the line. So what we do in the US, we shift the usage to QAB because the power cannot exceed the transmission limit. By doing this, I fragment the prices. And that's the concept I want to introduce here. In other words, by moving the flow from Q1 to QAB, I create two prices, PB at the export zone, PB, and PA at the import zone. As you see, PB is higher than P, and PA is lower than P. So once one line hits the limit, it is violated, and I solve the congestion problem like in the US, all the prices go loose. Instead of one price per system, every node has its own price. We call this price fragmentation. If you have two zones, you can solve the problem. Imagine if you have 10,000 nodes. Only an optimization can solve this problem. So in terms of transmission, you have single pricing models, like in Greece. You have zonal pricing with multiple zones, like in Italy. In general, you have bidding zones, like in Germany and Austria. They don't want more zones. NSOE is working now to reconfigure the zones, but Europeans don't want that. They want the bigger, the better as a zone, which is good for traders, but not for the consumers. And in the US, we have what we call nodal or locational pricing. As a result of that, I'm sorry, I have put this equation up. We produce LMPs, locational marginal pricing. Every bus has a price that has three parts. The nodal price of a reference bus. We have a component for the losses and a component for congestion. I have no time to go into details. We have written many papers on this. It's a standard practice now in the US that every market in the US calculates for every node at the clearing. You can go to the site of the ISO, of PJM, of New England, and so on. And you can see the prices in every node that is split in three parts. As I said, the energy price, the marginal loss price, the marginal congestion price. Since I have price fragmentation, in other words, price A at location A is different from price B, I need to give a hedging mechanism for a participant to go from point A to point B. We call those FTRs, financial transmission rights. So there is a market for FTRs. You go and buy that in an annual or a monthly auction. And basically you hedge the price differential. If you see on the figure here, LMP B at location B minus the price at A. So if that price difference is positive, and if you have an instrument, then the ISO pays you the value of that instrument. However, if the price turns against you, the price differential in a line, and the price differential becomes negative, then you need to pay the ISO. We call those an obligation instrument, pay point to point. There's another instrument called PTP, point to point option, where the market participants don't take any risk. It's simply when the price differential in the line becomes negative, they don't pay anything. It's a more complicated instrument and more difficult to develop, but we have instruments like this. That's how we hedge what we call the locational marginal price difference when you move power from point A to point B. You cannot have a nodal market without an FTR market. They go hand in hand. The fundamental concept in the business of congestion and nodal markets are the PTDFs, the power transfer distribution factors. This is an economic term. Engineers call them shift factors. For example, if you have a grid like this one, you inject power at bus A, let's say X megawatts, and you take it away from bus B, from a load, again, X megawatts, let's assume there are no losses. We're gonna see the impact of these bilateral transactions, injection at A, ejection at B, at any line, let's say line I. What is the flow? The flow in that line is X, the amount you inject, times the difference of the PTDFs, of those shift factors of PTDFs, which come out from the Jacobian of a power flow model, which we can produce very easily if we have the network topology of any grid. If you give me any grid, it doesn't matter how big, let's say 10,000 lines, 20,000 lines, we can produce this in a matter of a week. Just put the data in and produce those. This is important because if I have those, if this is a matrix, it's a simple matrix that gives me an idea, if I inject the power at location A, how that distributes anywhere in the grid. And that's very important for congestion management. I'll touch upon very briefly about one specific item, which is the capacity market, how generators recover their costs. Generators have certain revenue in the left, basically based on the energy price, selling energy, or reserve prices, selling reserves, or in markets we have capacity, a capacity price. But for that, they need to cover on the left, on the right here, the cost structure, the variable cost and the fixed cost. Well, the markets sometimes don't produce enough revenue to cover the cost of the generator. This is very important. This is what it's the revenue adequacy problem. You cannot have a generator lose money. They have to recover their costs and hopefully a certain revenue, profit. That's why we introduce in markets the capacity markets. Europeans never liked capacity markets. They consider capacity markets as a state aid. For example, in the middle of the financial crisis, the Germans were telling us that we don't want to have capacity markets in Greece. They are hypocrites because themselves have capacity markets. They don't call them capacity markets. They call them strategic reserves. It's an opaque bilateral market between the government and fossil power plants that don't work every day, but when they need them, they operate them at the detriment of the environment. So these are very expensive contracts. It's a form of a capacity market. So over the years, I became a big proponent of capacity markets. When I started this as a young market designer, I didn't think we need it. I thought energy prices, if you let them go to $10,000, is sufficient. Now I believe that we certainly need capacity markets in order to solve the missing money problem, as we call it, the missing money problem. And now certain European countries are going around to have capacity markets in order to solve the missing money problem for the generators. There's a whole science behind it, how you run capacity markets. There are different designs. I cannot get into this separate presentation. Over the last 20 years, we learned certain things. Anticipated developments. We didn't expect this. we thought the ISOs will be a small company that don't own assets. They will have a building, and basically they will have a budget to run the market and nothing else. These organizations became very powerful, even without owning transmission in the US. In Europe, the TSOs own transmission, but in the US, the ISOs, they become very powerful and very critical. They do all these things here. Risk management has become a major issue. When before deregulation, when a utility owned generation, transmission, distribution, its own company, the risks that are between business units, let's say generation and transmission, were hidden within the same company. Once we started the divestiture, when we sell generation from transmission, and then we separate distribution, we create risk problems for those utilities at the boundaries. So the vertical buffer lost. There's a whole science behind this, what we call the vertical buffer for risk is lost. That creates huge problems for the utilities when you divest certain portions of the business. Another major problem in our business is that competition is imperfect. There is a lot of gaming that we need to pay attention to. In the US, we have addressed the problem. In Europe, we have price volatility. You need to deal with this. Another problem that we don't like is that the states subsidize energy, for example, solar and wind. We don't want this. We want them to compete on an equal footing because they have a huge impact on power markets. Because if you give subsidies to solar, why don't give subsidies to gas power plants? It's a big problem. Now, we're moving to the new environment. We have DRs now. As I said, we're moving to the third wave. We need to decarbonize the system. All these sources are popping up at the edge of the grid. We don't build too many centralized power plants now. Everything is moving to the edge of the grid with solar, wind, small gas fuel generators, storage, combined heated power, microgrids. We have demand response, vehicles, electric vehicles, and so on. Many of these assets are what we call zero marginal cost resources. That creates a huge problem for us because we solve the markets using the variable costs. Now, if most of resources have a zero marginal cost, what does it do to the prices? Reduces prices. And that's a huge problem. Here is the problem in California. This is the famous DAC problem, DAC problem. You see the blue line here, the profile over a 24 period. Then you see the solar, that yellow thing that peaks in the middle of the day because that's when you have the sun. Then you have wind, which is the green at the bottom. The net of those three curves, if you come up with the net, is that red curve. That red curve is the net load. In the middle of the day, let's say 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 3 p.m., the net load has a belly. It's like a duck. And in the evening, you have the neck of the duck. This is a huge problem for us. It's the duck curve. So you need to meet the net load, and especially the evening ramp, up to 13,000 megawatts here in a 3-hour ramp. How do you solve this problem with solar and wind? You cannot. You need gas. That's why gas has become so important for the next, I don't know, 30 years to solve this problem. Now, you can solve this problem with combining hybrid plants, solar and storage, but storage, you don't have storage for discharge more than 3 or 4 hours. How about if you have a cloud cover for 3 days? You have serious problems with blackouts and brownouts. California has those. We have big problems because many gas power plants are leaving the system. This is a terrible thing because you cannot solve the problem today with solar and wind. You need gas power plants in the morning, as you see in the morning, to ramp down in order to give room for solar, and in the evening, ramp up gas power plants to solve the problem because you don't have solar. And that's the duck curve, which creates huge problems, not only operational problems and blackouts, but also economic. In other words, this is a duck curve, okay? This is a duck curve. As you see, there are 4 problems. Ramping down in the morning hours, over generation in the middle of the day. You may have so much energy in the middle of the day with the solar that you don't know what to do with it. So you dump it in the market with zero, or you start curtailing renewable energy because you don't know how to do with it because you have over generation. But you need it in the evening. So in the evening, you need ramp up the system. So the peak now is in the middle of the evening, let's say 6, 7, 8 o'clock, to meet the peak load now. And for that, the only asset we have that is very flexible today is gas power plants. The impact on the market, and we are losing sleep over this, is the impact on prices. You go back, I cannot show you recent data, but going back to 13, 14, in California, you can see here the prices. Even back then, you have negative prices in the middle of the day because you have over generation and the prices become negative. In other words, generators need to pay to the ISO in order to produce. And why they pay? Because if they curtail, they are decommitted, we need them to commit again, and then the startup cost is higher sometimes. So they prefer to pay and stay in the market to produce. So you have negative prices. Now we have about 1,000 hours in the year in California negative prices. With negative prices, how you expect gas power plants to survive? That's why you need capacity markets. This is from Germany, and again, all data, but it shows the trend. The prices over the 20 years have gone down 50% in the German wholesale market. So the reason for that is renewables. So renewables compete with gas power plants, and that creates a big problem for gas power plants. That's why we need capacity markets. I'm moving to the new environment. There are 2 major market forces. The IoT revolution on the right, this is what we call the consumer market revolution. Everything becomes smart. Thermostats, hot water heaters,
Alex?
Smart refrigerators, smart washer dryers. Smart means they have a sensor, you measure the usage, you have an API, you have connectivity with the cloud. On the left, you have another major market force, the policy directions of many countries to decarbonize the grid. Look at the recent climate global meeting in Glasgow. This is the major market force on the left, consumer revolution on the right, and in the middle, we have the markets. So the markets are evolving from wholesale now to markets close to the customer. We have the IoT, DR proliferation, and now we're moving to local markets. We're moving energy to the cloud with the cloud computing, and we solve this now with machine-to-machine learning, and we apply distributed stochastic control. We have many papers on this. I'll be happy to share you some of this work if you care to understand how these works develop. In other words, the action now is moving to distribution.
Alex, sorry to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. We have around 5 minutes.
Yeah,
and
well,
and I don't know how long you have, but I don't know if people have questions. That's the only thing I'm aware of. So if you can, in 2-3 minutes, maybe wrap up.
Yeah, I have a lot of material. I'll go fast.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Honestly,
that's important. That's okay. If there is one slide to know, is this one. There are multiple markets behind the meter, transactive energy markets. We have the T&D interface, and then they have on the top, we have, of course, the wholesale markets that we operate now for 10 years. But now there are all these DSO local markets. We have DR markets, transactive energy markets, and markets behind the customer. In the US, I don't want to talk much about that. We have the legal framework, how an asset, an aggregator in distribution can submit offers in the wholesale market. There is a coordination between the two, TSOs and DSOs, which is a very important work. So everything is moving to the cloud. You have all the smart devices at the bottom, everything you can think of, that they have sensors that they go to the cloud. That's how we optimize. We optimize buildings now. We create microgrids from left to the right. With microgrids, we retrofit buildings, we put smart devices, and we make them grid assets. If you look at the right, that's how we activate what we call the transactive energy. For distribution, we solve the similar problem. In distribution now, we iterate the distribution power flow with the market. The distribution power flow is very complicated. It's three-phased. So we produce 3 LMPs per phase, per node, not one like in wholesale markets. So the work we're doing now, we go to distribution, we come up with what we call virtual power plants. We aggregate them, we aggregate this capacity, we offer to the market through a supply curve on the right, upper right, and we submit it to the market. The market solves in wholesale market, and that's how we operate now, the combination of distribution with the wholesale markets. So the multi-tier participation, as you see here, there are 3 markets: wholesale, distribution, customer. There are various applications in each market. So what we want is an asset to participate in all those 3 markets and extract revenues from all these 3 markets. I will close with this slide. I'm spending all of my time now with a subsidiary we have in Europe to develop what we call the transactive energy model, the blockchain. So these are bilateral transactions between customers, peer-to-peer or business-to-business. And for that, of course, we use blockchain and smart contracts. And as part of that, the third important aspect of it is to develop our own energy token. And we're in the process of doing that in 2022. This is how we develop the blockchain. We have papers on this as well. It's a hybrid blockchain, a public blockchain based on Ethereum, and a private blockchain, one for each country. So key messages. The hierarchical market structure is a reality. It's an important part of transition to decarbonized economy. The decarbonization has created huge problems for us, because now new assets have 0 marginal cost. So we've been working over the last couple of years how to solve this problem with 0 marginal costs. This is a big problem. To solve this problem, we need very important political and regulatory policies, a different business model. Business model for utilities. Utilities need to change. If they stay the same, sooner or later, they will go bankrupt. And this is another presentation how the utility of the future looks like Google, or looks like Tesla, or Solar City, and so on. So the traditional energy companies have to change. So there is a big shift from wholesale to distribution. We believe in bilateral multi-tier markets. There are new products that will develop that, of course, require the coordination between wholesale markets and distribution markets. And as I said, the first 2 waves of competition was motivated to make the system more efficient and basically privatize the monopoly. Now the DR market is motivated by customer choice and by developing local markets, and we're moving towards democratization of the grid. So the grid is not controlled by anyone, but is controlled by the cloud, and every participant could be a prosumer, meaning a producer and a consumer at the same time. The integration of DRs requires a huge investment in distribution to allow multi-directional flows and allow peer-to-peer transactions. So we're moving to what we call virtual power plants, which is an aggregation of those DRs. As I said, the utility model needs to change. And the energy companies in the future will sell insurance, energy insurance, as opposed to energy itself. Because now, if you are in your house and you have solar in your rooftop and you have an electric car, you don't need the electric utility. Maybe you need it 10% of the time. So you buy from them insurance, or you can be completely off the grid, but you don't need the energy company. So the DR market is here. The only question is how to evolve it and develop it in a way that we continue to provide reliable service at good, affordable prices. Thank you. I finished.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex, for this lovely presentation. So it is 5 o'clock here. I mean, 4 to 5 in the UK was the talk. So if anyone wants to leave, they may leave now, but we will record anyway the presentation. We'll continue talking now because I think it's interesting, if that's okay with everyone and with Alex as well, because also we want to respect Alex's time. So we'll continue with questions. I can see Janusz has raised his hand. So Janusz.
Yes, thank you very much. So thank you, Alex, for your presentation. You galloped through 30 years of the regulation. And unfortunately, towards the end, when you were coming to the most interesting things, there was not enough time to cover it, because I'm not interested in what was in the past. I'm interested in what will be the future.
Of course, of course.
And you've touched about one thing which I want to ask you about, but very briefly, which is the question that basically you spent your whole life developing markets based on the locational marginal prices. So what do you think, what the markets will look like in the future when, due to the net zero commitments of many countries, the marginal price of energy will be zero? So there will be no LMPs. I mean, you said there'll be Google, those kind of things, but if you could share with our thoughts, more concrete, how exactly the markets will look like?
Yes, Janusz, yes. We're moving to a zero marginal cost system. There's no question about that. But if we think of the next 20, 30 years, if nothing more, we have more nodal markets than less. The decision, nodal versus zonal, transmission or transmission, is a political decision. I need another presentation of why Germans, they don't like nodal at some other countries, but nodal, if nothing else, will increase. For example, now we're developing the regional market, nodal market for the entire Central America countries. It's really amazing that Europe does not have nodal markets, but countries like Nicaragua and Costa Rica and Guatemala and Honduras will have nodal markets. This is something that will continue. Even in England, take England, you are in England. England has the characteristics of California. You have supply in the north and the load in the south. So you have already congestion in the intent correctors from north to south. All the academics in England, like Newberry and other people, talk about nodal markets, but the politicians don't want to listen to this for specific reasons. I don't want to go into this, but even in England, they are thinking of some form, even off-gem. They have an emotional think about nodal, but they are thinking of market-based congestion. They call it market-based congestion. Market-based congestion is another word for nodal. You may socialize the prices in the output, so the customers don't see different prices. But you need to solve the problem optimally. And you cannot, of course, the congestion problem, you cannot socialize all the congestion costs like they do in Germany. They have a cost out of the market of €2 billion a year. So the congestion problems moving to a zero marginal system will increase. That's why many people in Europe start worrying about this, because in the past, transmission was an asset in Europe that was plenty because the system were golden plated. Now with renewables, the congestion becomes systematic and unpredictable because you put renewables whenever you want to put them. So the congestion is not in specific lines only. You cannot solve the congestion problem like the Germans and the French with grid development by which is economically makes no sense because it's very expensive to go and build transmission whenever you have congestion. You solve it with counterflows and redispatching. So the congestion problem will increase with renewables. No question, because renewables will go where they go, when you have the sun and when you have the wind. So that will increase congestion, and we see that in Europe. They have all these paradigms with shallow connections, deep connections, who pays for it, all those policies, which on this side, we have solved them with Nodal and with Nodal markets. So in my mind, Nodal will become more efficient and more needed in the new environment. The problem with the zero marginal cost resources is where the revenues will come from. And that's the important question. The revenues will change. As you saw, I didn't put it here, but I thought that this is another presentation also. Moving to the new environment, the revenue sources will change. The revenues from energy will decrease substantially. The revenues from ancillary services will increase substantially. To operate the system in the future, you need very fast response, you need flexibility, you need other types of services we don't have today to operate the system. So the ancillary services revenue will increase substantially. The energy revenue will decrease, and the capacity revenue will increase. So we're moving to an environment where you will have Nodal, but the revenues will come from different sources. That's the bottom line. This is an issue we're facing here too. If you look at in California or other markets that have problems like California, like ERCOT, PJM is a huge market, so many problems are masked because of geography. In those markets like Texas or California, you can see already the shifting towards a higher revenue for ancillary services. So that's what you will see in the new environment. New revenue sources, money coming from different sources. But to me, Nodal will become even more important because the transmission problem will become more critical.
Thank you.
Okay.
I also saw Panagis raise his hand.
Excellent presentation. Thank you very much for this clear view of the current situation in the future. However, I have a question concerning the beginning of your presentation when you were presenting the mathematical aspect of things. Unfortunately, some markets in the EU are oligopolies, and I believe that single prices don't assist this condition. Is there any clue in the mathematics, any product or any byproduct of this formulation that can work for benchmarking market power by some participants? I mean, is there something in the mathematics that can assist the system operator to locate market power and benchmark it, rank it in terms of magnitude?
Of course. Basically, we have spent truly half of our careers on this problem because wholesale markets have market power problems. The first market we designed in California, we didn't even have market power. We were going by some theory of academics that market will take care of themselves and we don't need to deal with that. Of course, we know that this is a fallacy. There are very important mathematical formulations how to detect before it happens from the offers the market power. And furthermore, not only how to detect, how to mitigate, because you don't want to mitigate too much. Generators need to make a certain number of certain profit, be financially healthy. So the market power is an art. It's also a science. Some ISOs follow very rigid market power methodologies, like California, because we still have the memories of the energy crisis of 2000. Some other markets are more lenient. In other words, let me put it simply. Some markets, if you are a suspect, you are guilty. You follow? If you are suspect, you are guilty. In some other markets, if you are suspect, you are not guilty, but will take you through court. So there is another step, okay? There's another step. So these mathematical formulations, if we suspect you have market power in certain locations, we'll analyze your offer, we may accept it. In other words, you will pass, but in some cases, we'll mitigate it downward. In some markets, once you are detected that you have market power, we mitigate your bid, like in California. In some other markets, we don't immediately mitigate your bid, but you do another run. Those runs are similar to the runs that we run for the other markets, but we are looking for different things. Okay, so there are different screens, mathematical screens, that the offers are going through to understand if they have the potential for market power. If you have the potential for market power, it's not necessary that you exercise market power. This is very important. You may or you may not. So the mitigation happens if it's in those markets there is a further test that you need to be mitigated. And there are formulations, there are papers. I can share with you papers how you do market mitigation US style for nodal markets. Because the market power is not necessarily an energy problem. Let's say you have scarcity. It could be a local market power because you are in a cluster, you are in a zone that it's congested. If a zone is congested, even though there is power outside the zone, it cannot come in because of congestion. This is what we call local market power, as opposed to system market power. And because in the years we have nodal markets, we are concerned about market mitigation in clusters, in zones, in small zones. So we look at the system market mitigation, which is easy, and then we look at local market power mitigation, which is local in specific small zones. Okay, so based on my experience, I can tell you most of the market power mitigation is due to transmission scarcity, not due to the energy problem. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Vos, for this question. So Neil.
Thanks, Natalia. Yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks very much for the presentation. So I understand from what you're saying that really you're a big advocate of locational market or nodal pricing or locational pricing. You've also said that we're moving more towards a capacity-based requirement, both, I guess, in terms of generation and networks. It's the capacity that's going to be driving the problems in the future. So I presume then that the thing that you need to stimulate in the market is investment, the sort of thing that a capacity market would try to address, but also in the networks, that you're trying to get capacity in the networks as well. So does the nodal pricing or locational pricing, does that feed through to investment in the long term rather than, you know, like markets? The energy market deals with a lot with the having unit commitment generators available and dealing with the cost of the fuel. So is the locational aspect to what you've talked about also important for developing capacity and getting the capacity in the right place? Is that what it can do, or is it more suited to the market as it is at the moment, just dealing with getting generators running at the right time?
That's a great question, Neil. Actually, it's a great question. The answer to that question is evolving. The capacity market is needed, as you said, for the security of supply and ensuring that you have enough capacity in the future, let's say next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. That's the capacity market. And I strongly believe that we need it now. One of the reasons is that the marginal prices are coming down. So you need a supplemental income to solve the missing money problem for generators. I know UK has a capacity market. Now, in terms of the nodal, one of the reasons we implement in nodal is to provide incentives for generation investments and also transmission investments in the right location. If I know that the price differential in between two zones is very high, then I can build a coalition with other participants that go build an upgrade to solve the problem. One thing we saw after 20 years or 15 years of experience now in the US from nodal markets, I can tell you that clearly nodal helps put the generators in the right location, because you have nodal markets and you give the right locational signal. However, I can tell you that the nodal markets have not been very successful in giving incentives for transmission. The reason for that, and we have debated this for a long time in many fora, and published about that too, is the fact that the transmission as a business has characteristics of a public good, meaning that if I build transmission between two locations with a coalition of partners, that has system benefits that go beyond the benefit I get moving across my power. It has benefits for the system. It has benefits for what we call free riders. Someone else can benefit that is not part of the coalition. So in other words, transmission has the characteristics of a public good. It's not only private good. And that's why we have seen a reluctance in the US for merchant transmission. Merchant transmission means we want private companies to go build transmission as a coalition or investors separate from, let's say, the utility, the public utilities. This has not happened. It has happened in some places with some DC lines, but is not the prevailing model after 15 years. Still, utilities build transmission. The regulation now allows to give what we call the first right of refusal to utilities. And the regulators or the ISOs go to a market and they say, I want transmission in this place. And utilities bid to build transmission with other private companies. And in some cases, private companies win the tender, not the utility, because maybe they are very expensive. So there is that thing that has evolved. But in summary, we have not seen a lot of merchant transmission. So nodal, even though we hoped in the beginning that it will give the right incentives for private transmission investments, it has not happened because it has the characteristics of a public good. Free ridership, free riders, system benefits that the owners, the investors, don't get the benefit. Others get the benefit. That's why even today, when you build transmission, even a coalition of private partners, they rate base it and they get a standard rate of return like a regulated asset.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's how we. But nevertheless, nodal. I'm a strong believer and an evangelist of nodal. I many times I give presentations in Brussels. I can tell you many regulators in Europe want nodal. Many ISOs want nodal, not just one or two, many. The people who oppose nodal in Europe are the people with the political power. And the people with the political power in Europe are the traders. This is an unbelievable thing that I realized after many, many years of going to Europe. Is not the regulators, are the traders. When I give presentations, and I don't know many of people in those presentations, I can see the tables where the traders are when they ask all these ugly, very reactive questions. And I could tell when I ask later, where are these people? What are they working? Invariably, they work for trading companies. Because I can tell you, the bidding zone model in Europe is very good for traders. It's not good for well-designed markets.
Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it? Thank you.
Okay, I can see one more person raising their hand. So I don't know if, Alex, if you have maybe 10 more minutes to close in 10 minutes this, to finish this webinar. If everyone was so interested, we can make, I don't know, part 2, 3, 4, maybe, I don't know. But yeah,
Sure,
so
sure.
thanks.
No problem. No.
Yeah, thank you. So that we can close today at some logical time for you as well. So yeah, so Ale, you can go.
Okay, okay. So Alex,
Yes.
you presented the DAC problem, and we have discussed it in the
Yes.
before. Are there any technologies that you think can be used to store the excess power, like
Yes.
hydrogen or some other ways of?
That's what we do. That's what we do in California. California is one state, large state market. So we're not PJM with 15 states. We have a big problem. First of all, we have a lot of solar in California. So the DAC problem was discovered in California back in 2012. We call it DAC because it looks like a duck with a bell in the middle of the day. How we solve this problem? Yes, there are certain things we do in the algorithmic aspects of the problem in the market design, developing certain products like a ramping product. California has an ancillary service just for ramping. We don't have this in PJM or other markets, just for ramping. There are some other algorithmic aspects and products, but the key solution to the problem is hardware, is what market participants can do. So we use extensive storage in California to store it, but as you know, storage has a very, I'm talking about electric batteries. Electric batteries have a very short duration for discharge, maybe 3-4 hours. There is the storage here in Silicon Valley, the storage business is a billions and billions of dollar business. A lot of money are in storage, but we don't have more than 3-4 hours duration for discharge. We need duration for 3-4 days if you have a cloud cover. So we're exposed. And because, for example, in California, many nuclear plants are going out of business, and we need them. And there are no more investments in gas, which is unfortunate. I'm a big advocate of providing incentives to gas power plants to come to the market because we need them for flexibility. California will experience potential blackouts and brownouts after 2024. Every study we do in 2025, 26, we have big problems in the evening between 5 and 8 or 9. So given those problems, we're trying to do certain things. For example, build more small gas power plants, because that's what you need to provide the flexibility in the evening, okay? Number two, there are investments right now of billions of dollars for long-term storage, let's say a day or two. But there are other components of that too. For example, the governor, which is basically a very environmental sensitive governor, is having deals with the power plants that are all the dirty. It's like what Germany does, not to use them, but to use them in emergency if you need them, So the solutions are there, but that, of course, they are negative for the environment because you will use dirty power to do it, and the only relatively clean power is gas. That's why I'm a big advocate of gas. there are certain incentives that, let's say in California now, are given for gas power plants, but still the investors are very hesitant to build new gas power plants because of the uncertainty of the environment. Okay, the environment is uncertain. And to me, that's a big problem, because we'll face this problem. In other words, what happens in Europe now, let's put it this way, with the high energy prices in the UK and in the other countries in Europe, to me, it's not accidental. It is not only a result of COVID. It is not only a result of supply. It's a different energy crisis that you will be seeing often because of the investments in renewables are not going fast enough. The flexibility generation investments are not going fast enough, and investments in gas are below where they're supposed to be. And that gap creates this problem. And politically, there are certain countries, I don't need to mention, take advantage of that in Europe, and they increase the prices. Gas companies, in other words. So the point is, what we see in energy in Europe, the problem now with the crisis is a problem we'll see in many years to come due to lack of investment in flexible, relatively clean generation like gas.
Great, thank you for this, Alex. So if no one else has a question, I would also like to ask you a last question. If you could briefly tell us, so you mentioned that now there is like a third wave in the market, in changing the market, as you in the beginning you mentioned, and you said that decarbonization is a major,
Yes.
that they aim to decarbonization, and in the end you mentioned the zero marginal costs. Is the zero marginal costs would you say the main challenge now that you will have to tackle because of decarbonization?
Yes, the zero marginal cost system forces us to go back to rethink how to clear markets, because now the market's clear with offers, and the offers basically reflect the variable costs. So the clearing is with the variable cost of generation. Now, the people who make it in the market, they make enough profit to cover part of their fixed costs. And if the markets don't clear at a high price, we have capacity markets to recover all their fixed costs and the profit. But as we move into a zero marginal cost system, this problem will intensify. And we need, and we're trying to look into this problem for years now, of new methodologies. There are in literature some theories how to clear markets, take into account capital costs, because the capital costs are there. The marginal cost of solar is zero because the marginal cost of the sun is zero, but there is a capital cost. So the question is, if we include capital costs in the procurement, then the problem becomes bigger and almost becomes a planning solution by including capital costs in the procurement of minimizing the cost, procurement of the services for minimize the procurement costs. So there are other ways to look into this, but all of them are in the drawing board. They are new. We're thinking of this problem, but clearly will require measured changes in the clearing of those markets. So the new generation of market designers have a lot of work to do to solve this problem, okay? Because what we did 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago when we started this, we didn't even think of this problem, okay? We didn't even think of solar. So our thinking was fossil power plants, hydro plants, and nuclear, that's it. Now we have all these assets at the edge of the grid. There is so much work in the lower part in distribution markets, close to the customer, but the zero marginal cost is a key thing. The other thing that bothers me with the decarbonization is that governments give incentives, give subsidies. Giving subsidies There's a lot of subsidized energy in the system for solar, wind, you can do this in the beginning, but now solar and wind can compete on an equal footing with fossil power plants. Actually, in many places, the renewable cost is lower than the cost of fossil power plants. Why we keep giving them incentives? Those incentives destroy the markets. They destroy the markets because they are skewing the prices. If I have a subsidy for the government, my bid will be different than the bid of someone else, let's say a gas power plant that does not have subsidies. It needs to recover all the revenues from the market. So they create an uneven playing field, which is a huge problem. We have this problem in the US. For example, many nuclear power plants now, they go to the governors and they say, if you don't give me $6 billion, I will get out of the system. This is a huge problem. I don't believe in subsidies. I prefer incentives. And I believe in penalizing bad behavior. In other words, I had a slide that I didn't talk about carbon policies. A good carbon policy is a carbon tax. Otherwise, you penalize the people who pollute the environment. You don't give incentives to people, you don't give incentives to low carbon solutions, because this does not work really in the long term. I'll give you an example. Why we don't give incentives to people in Germany who go to work with bikes? They don't even use a car. They go with bikes. They have a zero carbon footprint. Why don't you give them an incentive, but you give incentives to low carbon technologies like solar and wind? That creates perverse incentives. We need to penalize emitters, and we do that with putting a price on carbon through a tax or through the market. And we have, for example, the New York ISO is developing models now to incorporate in the offer to a market the carbon cost. And that's how you reflect the cost, what we call environmental dispatch. So now the dispatch takes into account the cost of carbon. That's what the solution is not to give subsidies to low carbon technologies, because you do this very selectively. There are so many low carbon solutions that people and the society follows, and they don't get any subsidy. Why you give subsidy to some but not to others? So in other words, these political solutions, they do more harm than good.
Thank you very much, Alex. I have one participant asking me if they can ask one more question, but I want to ask you if you have time for that.
One more question, yeah, because
I just want to ask what they told me. Yeah, so, okay, so please go on.
Yeah, this is Professor Chousos from Greece. Hi, Alex.
Oh, Maki, hi, how are you?
Fine, fine. One question. I always thought that distributed generation will reduce the need for transmission. Statistically, maybe I'm wrong. Somehow I thought you produce energy close to where you need it, so why should you carry it all over? Somehow, except for some exceptions, the overall load on the need for a new transmission will go down. That's a sense I had. Maybe I'm wrong. But,
no, you are not wrong. It's a very smart question, Maki. Very smart question. But it's a mixed picture. It's a mixed picture because if you put the solar right there as in your rooftop for a very local solution, yes, you don't utilize the high voltage transmission system. You're right. But you need transmission solutions because the solution in a large scale is to combine markets. Look at Europe. Europe wants to develop a pan-European market. The same thing in the US. Now we have in the West, in the US, we have the energy imbalance market for many states in the West. So one way to solve the problem that I didn't spend much time on is making the footprint of the market bigger. You make it bigger. In our business, the bigger the better, because that's how you mask problems like the duck curve. PJM does not have a duck curve because it's one of the reasons is, of course, you don't have too much solar in those states. But the second key reason is it's a huge footprint, many states. So one way to solve the problem is to create bigger markets. By creating bigger markets, you create what we call diversified power pools. So there are a lot of transactions for what in the past was imports and exports, now become within the same pool. And by doing that, you take advantage of one important asset, one important characteristic of these markets, the diversity. The DRs are diverse. They have different operating characteristics. They have different response times. They are different technologies. So if you have them in a larger grid, you could sell that to someone else. For example, now we curtail a lot of solar in the middle of the day because we don't know what to do with it. If we have a bigger market, you can sell it to someone else. So the bigger the market, you sell excess power, and you buy power when you need it. By creating those bigger markets, you need at the same time to move power in longer distances. That's why you need transmission. In other words, you need all solutions. You need transmission across many states, what we call the highway system of electric grid, but at the same time, you need local solutions for the local communities. But there's no question that also you need transmission to move power along distances to solve all these problems that result from DRs. So even though it seems an oxymoron, you need both solutions.
Okay, well, I'm closing, Natalia. Just to close it, you said that you didn't get enough investments to build new transmission lines, and I guess, I think you gave the answer near the end when you said somehow for people you have to include how they will make back their money in your scenario. Somehow a transmission line, you cannot, it has to play in the market differently in your models if someone is going to build it, and he has to know in advance, the investor, how that transmission line would get money back for his investment. The same way, I think you have to think of what Takis asked before on how we store this extra energy when it's free. Somehow, whoever makes that investment, maybe a lake up high to keep the water and then use it, will know that somehow that investment would be made back with certain rules that will be known from the beginning. I'm not an economist, but somehow I'm trying to follow your thought.
Yeah. The Nodal model has not given incentives for building transmission by coalition of private investors, We still build transmission from the utilities and the regulator, and anybody can participate, but there is no what we call merchant transmission, sufficient merchant transmission to make money out of the, let's say, competitive markets, not out of regulation, meaning cost plus an IRR, a fixed rate of return, 10%. So that's the reason, the problem with the transmission. Who pays for it? Of course, the customers. How they pay for it, it will be part of their bill. So the rules are known in advance. the investment is taking place, and the investor knows that they will recover their cost plus a rate of return, let's say 10% or 9% or 11%. Now, for storage, the game is different because storage can also be used as a transmission asset. But if it's used as a transmission asset, it cannot participate in the market and make money from competitive products. It's one or the other. The owner needs to choose, are you a transmission asset or you're a market asset? If you're a market asset, that you play the market, the big debate we have currently in many places in the US is the ISO, because they are looking a few years down the line, as I said, and they see brownouts and blackouts. They want to take control of your asset. It's like they want to tell you, I want you to produce for me between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. Usually market participants bid in a way to maximize their profits. That's why we have markets. They care about their profits. Now, if the ISO, which is the regulated company, comes and tells me as a storage owner, oh, no. You cannot discharge your battery at 10 a.m. when you can make most of the money. You need to keep the state of charge for the evening, let's say between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. That's very concerning to me. You need to pay me in order to hold the state of charge for the evening only. So there is a debate now, if we start putting constraints in the clearing, in the optimization software, to restrict those assets for discharging anytime they want during the 24-hour period, and discharging only between 4 p.m. and 8 or 9 p.m., which is the new peak. If we end up doing that, those owners need to be paid appropriately, because you cannot have the government tell me how to operate, right? If you tell me how to operate, you need to give me the right incentive and pay me back an amount that we'll decide. So if we move down that path, and it seems in certain states like California, who are moving down that path because we have scarcity in the evening hours, then we need to find the right compensation mechanisms.
Thank you, Alex. So I would like to actually close here the webinar for today. I would like to thank you all for participating, for attending, and mostly Alex for his presentation. Thank you so much, Alex, for also staying with us for so long after the pre-scheduled webinar. So thank you all. We will, whoever has said that they want to be informed of future webinars, we will inform you. Everyone have a lovely day for Alex, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex, and see you some nice places in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Thanks.